Hey, kids.
Good morning.
How you doing, Will?
I
Hey,
was
Dad.
trying to join as a guest, but it won't let me because I'm Oz, apparently.
You're omnipotent.
Yeah.
You're omnipresent. You're
I was even going through incognito and figured I could use a different email address and just sneak in as a watcher, but it threw me right in here.
when you are the internet.
Well,
Have you seen The Matrix?
yeah,
You are the guy that controls the Matrix. You invented the Matrix.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to get out of here and just join as a viewer.
Can you let me share screen?
Oh, the demands of a diva.
I'm getting a host disabled participant screen sharing. Yep, still getting that. Won't be able to do much without slides.
Will disappear.
I don't know if Will is still working on that or if he's gone.
He just may be gone.
Because if he's gone, I think we're done.
I think that's it. Thank you.
And doesn't look like we have any participants anyway, so.
Oh, I'm here. Well, I have a share screen button, Mary. Do you know?
Oh, there are some participants. Oh, it says there are 8.
Oh, there are. Okay.
So are we're not gonna be able to see them?
I don't think you're gonna be able to see them.
Oh, darn.
Hello, Andy,
Oh.
Brian, Deb.
Oh, that's a
Jeffrey,
drag.
William.
Oh, I hate looking
William
at.
Hankey. There's a William Hankey. Sounds like it's
Will, is there any way to let the attendees be visible? Oh, man. And I guess I can't share my screen.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Sure.
It says host has disabled participant screen sharing.
The host has.
Yeah.
Did that change it?
There we go. Let's share screen too.
Well, good morning, all. You're now seeing the behind the scenes of what a successful presentation has to go through.
Yeah. Am I supposed to launch in that or?
Oh, well, why not I introduce you?
Oh, okay, cool.
Would that be okay? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I just didn't know the protocols.
We don't have one yet. This is, thank you for coming, everyone. I'm now going to speak to the attendees. Thanks for coming to the Fenton Chamber of Commerce's Business Success Group. We launched this year, thinking we were all going to be together in a room and have a lot of face-to-face time and some good conversations. And obviously, this has changed everyone's life. So we are doing this virtually, and I want to thank the Fenton Chamber and Mary for being flexible and joining. The series has really been quite informational and helpful. We've had a lot of different topics dealing with businesses, business, how to run your business, things that can help you both in business and your personal life, and today is no exception. Let me introduce Mary to you. I had to write this down because I want to make sure it was correct, because I've known Mary for several years. We both belong to a group called E for E, Experts for Entrepreneurs. And if you are a small business, I suggest you check out Experts for Entrepreneurs. It's quite an amazing group with some amazing people. But anyway, back to Mary. Mary is an executive coach and confidant who works with business owners, executives, and professionals who want to get more of the right things done with less turmoil and drama. Through her company, MCK Coaching, Mary provides access to a number of reliable assessments which provide fascinating and valuable insight regarding behaviors, driving forces, and emotional intelligence. She is a renowned author with her book, Making Minutes Matter, Your Guide to Being Content with How You Spend Your Time. It's an amazing book, very powerful information. Today's presentation, Using Emotional Intelligence to Lead a Better and Happier Life, or to lead better and live happier. Mary, take it away. It's all yours.
You got it. Thanks, Thad. And hey, that renowned author. Now I'm feeling pretty special. So thank you very much for that introduction. A little bit of housekeeping to start, although I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work. Now that I say that, let me get over here. And there we go. I think use the Q&A box for questions. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see it or if anybody will be able to see it. So
I'll be able to see it, Mary. So
okay. So you'll be able to let me know if there's questions. Awesome. That's fantastic. And then using chat for responses, or because there are some times I'm going to ask some questions. Normally I would do this with breakout rooms and with polls, but we don't have that functionality today. So it's just unfortunately going to be me yammering at you and you doing some thinking now and then when I ask a question. So if you do want to unmute yourself, if you can, I don't know if that's possible in the way this is set up, but to share something, I think that's awesome. I love being able to see people on these virtual things. But since we're not in that position today, if there's a way at some point when I ask a question, if you want to unmute and chat, I think that's awesome. This is particularly now that I can't see anybody, it's really tempting on these kinds of programs to do other things. And if you are in a mindset where you're trying to be more focused in general in life, these kinds of webinars are a good time to do that, to kind of tune everything else out and stay focused on what you signed up to do. And hopefully I can keep it entertaining enough to keep your attention and interesting enough. There will be some time for Q&A at the end as well. Not sure how that's going to work, but it will be there. Today, first of all, I'm going to tell you why I should be talking to you about this. I'm going to share with you what EQ is, what areas of your life are impacted by EQ, what improvements have the greatest impact, and then give you some tips for more confidence, resilience, contentment, and success. So if that sounds good, I'm gonna breeze through this why me, but I just want you to know that I'm not talking to you about this because I read a book yesterday. This is something I've been deeply involved in and worked on educating myself about for a very long time. So I'm a certified professional coach. I'm also in the process of, by the end of this year, actually executive and team coaching. Team coach, it's actually all done, just waiting for that certification. I'm certified in emotional intelligence through MHS, which is the licensing body for the primary EQ assessment. And I do some other stuff. And one of the most important things is I'm fascinated by human behavior. Why do we do what we do? How do we think? How do we interact with other people? I'm just endlessly fascinated by that and have been for most of my life. So that's why I can be talking to you about this with some level of expertise. I want to share with you, I created this framework for the work that I do with clients, and there's a reason why I'm sharing this particular thing with you, which will make sense in a second. But I love working with business owners who are evolving from being a successful business owner to being a successful leader. They are two very different skill sets. And someone can be running being an owner of a very successful business and yet still have some other skills that need to be developed in order to lead their organization. The reason I like working with smaller businesses, I joke that it's the difference between a speedboat or a pontoon boat and a barge. When you're working with a giant corporation, changing the culture or developing the culture or even shifting the way people interact with one another is much harder to do than it is when you're a small company. And I like working with the owners because they're the decision makers and they can drive the results from the top down. So I created a framework called the E3 shift with the work that I do with my clients. And it focuses on effective priorities, emotional intelligence, and exceptional teams. So it starts from the inside with how the owner is spending their time, and then developing the people skills necessary to be a good leader. And then that fans out to how are they creating a good team or teams within their organization. I look at a small business as a team in itself. So that's the work we do. And you'll see right there in the middle is emotional intelligence. And it impacts so much. And so that's one of the key things that we work on. And that's obviously what we're going to be talking about today. So what is the definition of emotional intelligence? You can read here, but it's a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain relationships, cope with challenges, and use emotional information in a meaningful way. So many people think that it's just how I interact with you, but it's much, much more than that. And I'll get a little bit more deeply into the pieces that make up your emotional intelligence score, but know that it's broader than many people realize. And that's why it's so important to have these skills, because it impacts a lot of different areas. Now, Thad, I don't know if people will be able to put this is normally a poll, but if people will be able to put answers in chat and you'll be able to see them, I'm not sure. But
yes, I will be able to see them.
Okay, so here's the question. What do you imagine? There's a difference between average leaders and superior leaders. What percentage of that difference do you think is attributable to a person's level of emotional intelligence? Throw that in the chat box, and as you get them, Thad, if you can just call them out, what people are guessing.
Okay, we have 90%, 75%. Who else? I'm reading from the chat box, so if you can click the chat box. 82.4%, 95%. So yeah, it looks like it's pretty high. People seem to.
Well, this is a pretty sharp crowd because it's 90%. So you've either learned about this before or you're just dead on in your innate knowledge of this, because it's 90%. When you get to a certain level in an organization, it's not how you read a balance sheet. It's not how effectively you purchase. It is how well you interact with other people, how well you solve problems, all of the things that are associated with emotional intelligence. So again, there's a lot of average leaders out there. There's in a lot of situations where people can be a leader. So let's look at that for a second. You may be in a situation where you are at the top of the org chart, where you are leading your team, or you are leading your entire organization, or you may be in a situation where in a volunteer capacity, you're leading the board, or you lead your family. There's leadership situations in various aspects of life, even if you are not leading in your organization as the top of the org chart. There are lots of ways to be leading. You may also be in the middle of the org chart. You could be somewhere where there's leadership above you and there's people who are direct reports below you. I don't kind of like that below and above thing, but that look to you for leadership and guidance. You may be somewhere in the middle. And you may be, like me, which is a solopreneur. It may be just you. But the thing about that is that all of the aspects that are underneath emotional intelligence are involved with you leading yourself. And the truth is that even if you are a solo business, you may be hiring contractors. So different. I have people who work on website, and people who work on marketing, and people who work on the accounting, all those kinds of things. And so I am essentially leading those people as well, even though they are not employees. It requires leadership to keep all of those balls in the air. And it also, again, going back to those volunteer capacities. So think about all the different ways that you lead, because you're not, even if you're working alone, you're really not alone. There's a lot of impact that you have out there in the world. So something to think about. And normally this next one is a breakout session, but we'll see if there's any way for y'all to unmute if you want to share this. But I'd like you to think about leaders that you have now or have had in the past, and think of one who was particularly good, a really, really good leader, and or think of one who was particularly bad. I know from my experience in corporate America, I certainly had ones that I could put in either category or in both categories. Not the same person in both categories, of course. But think about, what was the situation? What was your role in relation to that person? Were they your boss, or were they someone else's boss? Or was it actually someone that you collaborated with? You were both leaders, but for different departments, different groups. What did they do well? Or what did they do badly? So what made them the best, or what made them the worst? And then what was the impact on you, the team, or the company? Now, Ed, do people have the capacity to unmute if anybody wants to share that? Share an
I don't know if
idea?
everyone's on mute, because I think everyone's an attendee. But if you want to put your answer in to the chat or to the question and answer, I'll be happy to pass it along.
Okay, it'll be a lot of information for someone to have to type into the chat.
But while we're waiting for anybody to put in, I will volunteer my situation. I had one of the best bosses in the world. He was a manager. Boss has some negative connotation, doesn't it? Anyway, he was my manager. I was hired as an entry-level phone operator at this company, and he told me that his main focus in his job was to get people to excel at their current job and groom them to transfer out of his department and onto bigger and better things in the company. And I found that to be just amazing. His job was not to get you just trapped in his department, but was to cultivate your skills. And if you had the abilities and the inclination, to find the best place for you in the company that would help you excel your career. And it made a lot more work for him, because he was not just running his department of these phone bank operators, but he was looking for people that excelled at that and tried to develop their skills to the point where he could get them out of his department and into other departments that would benefit you personally and professionally. I thought that was a great skill as a leader and as a manager to really develop his employees' skills.
I mean, that is a great leader, and that's a fantastic example. And what a delightful and uplifting opportunity to work for someone like that, who wanted the best for everybody that was working for him. And people may have experienced the opposite of that, where the leader is afraid for their people to get too good, because then they'll leave, or afraid for their people to look better than them, to look smarter than them. And so they do all sorts of things that essentially shoots themselves in the foot, because nobody wants to work for a leader who doesn't want them to grow. Nobody wants to work for a leader who takes all the credit for themselves. And so people primarily do that. I believe that most of the ineffective qualities that one sees in corporate America are driven by one or more of these three things: power, insecurity, and greed. You can look back at anything that any detrimental choice that someone makes in their behavior, and it will lead back to one of those motivations. And insecurity is a huge one. And sometimes it's the biggest blusterers who have the most insecurity because they're trying to hide something. But the insecurity that some feel at their people being smarter than they are can be tragic. So I love that you had that experience with a really good leader. And I'm sure that those of you out there have had, hopefully you've had experiences with good leadership as well. If it wasn't in a corporate situation that you were in, perhaps in a volunteer capacity aboard or whatever, or maybe even a parent who was a really terrific role model for leadership, which would be awesome too.
Jeffrey had a situation. He said that he had a boss that was a racist, and it soured him not only on the boss, but also soured him on the company. He needed the job, so he couldn't tell his boss to shove it. So,
wow, that had to be a really tough thing to do every morning, to go into that place. I can only imagine. And whoever was letting that boss get away with it is equally culpable. I mean, I guess if that person was the owner, then they're culpable all by themselves. But boy, I'm sorry you had to go through that, because that is a really bad situation. And hopefully you didn't have to stay there too long before you could get away, because sometimes that's your only choice. I mean, some people who are not going to be self-aware enough to figure out what their shortcomings are, it's just if they're not gonna be open to that, then they're not gonna change. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Jeffrey continued, he owned the company. So that could be your question.
It'd be interesting, Jeffrey, if you know if that company's still in existence or how they're doing financially. Some bad news. With regard to EQ or emotion, they call it EQ, even though it's actually EI, because it's kind of like your IQ and your EQ. But with regard to EQ, there's a couple categories of competencies, and those are in the personal column. It's your self-awareness. How aware are you of how you feel, what you're thinking, and so on, and how well you manage yourself. So you can be aware that you're really angry. Do you fly off the handle, or do you have better strategies for managing that anger or that frustration? And then on the other side is the social. So how aware are you of the social situation? And even now, when we're all separated, I mean, there's still a huge social aspect of all of our worlds. It's just that we're doing it more distantly than we are face to face. And some would say it's even more challenging when we're distant, because out of sight, out of mind, leadership is harder when you don't have people that are gathering together and so on. So how aware are you socially? And then how well do you manage relationships? Because some relationships are easy and they're good. And, you're just, on the same, firing on the same synapses as someone else. And you just think they're great. And then sometimes you're not. Your people are just different. They have different behaviors. They have different things that motivate them. And so how do you manage relationships that might not be the easiest? And how do you manage relationships at all? So those are the two areas, the two silos, if you will, of the competencies. But here's looking at the entire EQI 2.0 model. And this is the initial model that was created by Reuven Bar-On, who's one of the originators of this whole assessment, and working with Daniel Goleman. And you can see that there are many different wedges within this model. And within the wedges, there are what are called subscales. So let's just take a real quick look at these. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I want you to see how many different things are involved in emotional intelligence to help give you a better grounding for what your EQ score shows, and where the opportunity is for boosting skills. So the first is your self-perception, which includes how do you regard yourself? Where are you on the path to self-actualization, being all that you can be in terms of what you believe actualization is? It's kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Are you becoming the person that you believe you can and want to be? And then how aware are you of your own emotions? When something is happening and you're triggered in some way, I mean, do you recognize the difference between I'm just hungry and I'm tired and I'm angry? And some of those are when you're tired, the way you're going to behave is going to be different than when you're energetic, and what the background cause of that emotion is. So that was a little bit confusing in the way I said that, but when you're having an emotion, can you name it? Can you accurately say, this is what I'm feeling? And in addition to that, can you also be aware of what triggered it? What is making you feel that way? The next is self-expression, and that is how well do you express what is inside to the outside world? Are you able to express yourself with emotions? I mean, we've seen, people that they call ice queens. They appear to never have any emotion at all, or just completely stoic, and you can't ever tell, what their poker face, you can't tell if they're happy or they're sad or they're angry. They're very hard to read, and they're also very hard to work with because they're not giving anything back in terms of emotion. And we don't have to be wearing all of our emotions on our sleeve and pouring all our guts out at every moment, but there needs to be some level of the ability to express the emotion that you're feeling. The next is how assertive are you? And note that assertive is not the same as aggressive. It's assertive is able to share what you need to share from a place of strength and confidence, as opposed to, because actually aggression is actually more from a place of requiring power and have feeling insecurity. That's why people are aggressive. So strength and confidence is assertiveness. And then independence. How are you able to make decisions on your own? Are you able to think independently, or are you constantly looking out to other people to validate what you're thinking or to help you figure out what you need to do? A level of independence is really important. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no collaboration, because the next section here is interpersonal. So how do you handle your interpersonal relationships? What is the level of empathy that you have for other people? And that's very different than sympathy. Empathy is much more understanding what someone else is feeling from their point of view, as opposed to feeling sorry for them. No one wants to be pitied, but people do want to be understood. And then finally, social responsibility in this one is where are you in believing that you need to be a proactive and supportive part of the social community, whatever that means to you. It doesn't necessarily mean in a not-for-profit or politically, but it's what responsibility do you have to be a good human being in the social network that you have? Decision-making is the next one. And this is kind of where it gets into, many people are surprised that this is part of EQ, but it's how well do you problem solve? The reality testing is interesting. It's, do you see things as they are? Because you may have run across someone who it's like, what color is it on your planet? Because that is so not what's happening here. And so how well can people see what truly the situation is, or are they only seeing it through their very narrow lens of their experience? And then I find impulse control very interesting. We're seeing I would say nationally, we're probably seeing greater instances of loss of impulse control than I've seen in my nearly 60 years on this planet. There's a lot of rage, a lot of disagreement that is coming to a head in some very, very ugly ways in certain situations. And impulse control does not mean not taking action. It means not losing your mind with how you react to something that triggers you. And that can be a really important one to keep in control, or to be aware of and to have control of. And then finally, stress management. Stress is inevitable. We're never going to get rid of all the stress in our lives, even though part of the work that I do is to help my clients have less stress in their role as owners and leaders. I would never tell them that you're never going to have any more stress. It's there. And one of the reasons I'm sure you've heard the simile to the metaphor to weightlifting. When you lift more weights, you strengthen your muscles. Stress can build muscle for you. It can build muscle so that you're able to tolerate more kinds of stress. But you also have to be careful in what you're tolerating, what you're dealing with, and not take it too far. So one of the things that can decrease your level of stress is how flexible you are. Are you very controlling? Does everything have to be exactly the way you want it? Or can you kind of go with the flow sometimes, depending upon the situation? Again, the stress tolerance, when you are in a stressful situation, how well do you tolerate it? How well do you deal with it? And then finally, optimism. Are you a glass half full or a glass half empty person? Certainly, for me, I find people who are relentlessly positive no matter what, the kind of bouncing off the walls, hearts and rainbows. I find it a little bit annoying, but I really do like optimistic people. I like people who are looking for the positives as opposed to looking to the negatives. And I mean, you've heard the negative Nancy and all that kind of thing. I mean, someone that every single thing they say, it's just, for heaven's sake, I mean, couldn't you come up with something positive to say? So it's your level of optimism. How bright do you think the future is, or how bright do you think the current situation is? So if you went back to that good or bad leader, I'll put the chart back up here so you can kind of see, but what subscales would you say, what area, what wedge, or what subscale specifically would you say contributed to that person's goodness or badness as a leader? So if you took a look at this again, do you feel like they didn't see themselves as they were, that they were very poor at expressing themselves, that they were mostly bad with interpersonal, or good? I shouldn't be keeping going with the negative here, because Thad had a really good situation. Was it, did you have someone who simply couldn't make a decision to save their lives, and so everybody was always kind of going off in different directions, not knowing what to do because they were just vacillating all the time? Or someone who just seemed like they were walking around with their hair on fire all the time, that they were so stressed? Or again, the converse of that they just handled it really well, no matter what came at them. They dealt with it with calm and equanimity. They just remained chill and purposeful when they were hit with something that might have pushed some other people off the deep end. One of the ways that it helps to look outwardly at the experiences that you've had with other people is that sometimes it's much easier to see those things, the good things or the bad things, in other people than it is to see them in ourselves. One, because I think in most cases, the very self-aware people that I know are much harder on themselves than they need to be. And the ones who are not self-aware are not nearly hard enough. So if you question yourself a lot, if you are a little bit hard on yourself sometimes, the good thing about that is that you likely have a level of self-awareness that helps you in terms of your emotional intelligence, because you get that there are improvements that can be made. And the one challenge with that is that often people recognize there are improvements, but they see them as much more dramatic, that their flaws are much more dramatic than they truly are. So it is kind of an interesting, would it be an irony that the ones who need to look at themselves more carefully don't think they need to, and the ones that do look at themselves more carefully often are far too critical of themselves. Go figure. So when you're thinking about those leadership situations that you've had, if anybody would want this chart to look at and kind of keep in front of them, I'm happy to send you a copy of it. Just you can email me and you'll have my email at the end here. But when you see it in other people, it helps then makes it a little bit easier to turn it back on yourself in terms of, well, where do I land with this? And instead of just making it kind of ethereal in terms of what you might be able to do, here's some exercises that you can do for yourself that help you be more aware. For instance, if something gets on your nerves every single time, what is it that's triggering you? I told this story before, so anybody who's heard this presentation, but there's a certain kind of a person that triggers me, or that triggered me more before I worked on it. But it's the person who's very condescending and kind of a know-it-all, very patronizing, that they assume that they're smarter and better than everybody in the room. There's something about that kind of a person that just gets on my last. So it was important for me to know it wasn't necessarily the person, it was the behavior. And it's the behavior, no matter what person does it, that triggers me. And so then you can develop coping strategies when you know you're going to be in a situation where you could be triggered with whatever that trigger is. How do others perceive you? I've always said it'd be so interesting if we could just for one day be outside of ourselves to see ourselves how other people see us. Because again, I think far more people are harder on themselves than they need to be. And if you saw what other people appreciate about you or admire about you or see you as an expert in, it would be such an interesting thing. And conversely, if there are areas that could use some skill building, if it's hard to read you, if people can't tell where you stand, if you feel like it's hard to make decisions, you're always afraid that if you make a decision, it's going to be the wrong one, certain things like that, those can be perceived by people outside of yourself as well. And it's good to, have some clarity about how other people see you. And I'll get into how you can figure that out in a bit. But the next is what am I feeling right now? Taking a moment to get in touch with what is going on. It's people who help people with weight loss will often say that it's important to know why you're picking up something to eat. Are you bored? Are you sad? Are you angry? I mean, what is it that's making you want to eat that's not hunger? So being aware of what you're feeling is in the moment, the only way that you can do something to manage that feeling in whatever way, then you have to know what the feeling is specifically. And that takes a little bit of slowing down just for a moment and assessing where you are. Can you pause and think before reacting? We are very much not a pause and think society anymore. Everything is fast, 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 fast. There's more interrupting than ever, and there's a couple of reasons for that, which I'll share in a second. But when you are triggered, there are different areas of your brain that work, and the first area of your brain that works is your amygdala, which is some people call it your lizard brain, but it's your fight, flight, freeze, or fold part of your brain. And I'm sure you've heard this, that cavemen and women had it because they needed to react quickly when they were in danger of being eaten by a tiger. So they had those legitimate fears. but that area of the brain is still there and still doing that job, even though the likelihood of getting eaten by a tiger is very slim. We react that way to things that attack us in other ways. And so if you've ever heard that you need to count to 10 before you respond, like when you're really mad, count to 10 before you say anything, or even type that email, but wait until the next day to send it when you're really angry. The reason is because the prefrontal cortex, which is where the reasoned part of your decisions happens, takes a little bit of time to kick in. If you react right away, it's going to be working from your fight, flight, freeze, or fold, which sometimes can be, you might not shout something mean. You may just sit in a stony silence, which is kind of that fold. It's like, I give up, you're right, whatever, which is also not a good way to respond because it's not genuine. It's from a highly emotional state that people are making the decision to do that. So if you can wait just a little bit, your more reasoned brain will kick in. Taking another perspective, literally trying to get out of your own mind and see something from the other person's perspective. Very often when we're in a situation and someone shares with us their perspective, the first gut reaction is to say, well, my perspective is this. And the problem with that is that what that tells the other person is that I'm really not interested in your perspective. I'm just interested in telling you what mine is. What can make a huge difference there is if you listen to their perspective, acknowledge that you've heard it and understand it, and perhaps in this moment, don't share your perspective. Maybe it's not necessary, but it can be if someone shares how they feel about something, it sounds like that's really important to you. I get that. That's not agreeing with them. It's acknowledging that you understand their perspective. It's a respectful communication that you're listening, that you're right there along with them, and you're accepting that that is their perspective, and you're okay with that, even if you have a different viewpoint. This next one, this how long do I talk? If you do this, you'll be very interested, and it's sort of interesting because here I am yammering on and on and on, but this is a little bit of different situation in a training. If you're in a regular like networking situation, or if you're on a webinar where everybody needs to tell a little bit about themselves, or they need to share a little bit of a story, watch how long people talk. There's a I think the guy's name is Mark Nemko, I think. He created something called the traffic light rule, which I think is fascinating. And it's a picture of traffic light. And what he says is that when you talk between, sorry, there's my dog. If you talk between 0 and 20 seconds, it's green light. People are cool, people are listening. When you go between 20 and 40 seconds, that's the yellow light. People are starting to drift a little bit. And if you go longer than 40 seconds, you've lost people. They may still be looking at you, but unless you're an amazing storyteller or telling a fantastic story, people are ready for you to move on. I listened to a podcast one time. I was going to be a guest. And so I listened to several in advance to see what it was all about and make sure that I was going to be on target. And one of the ones, it was a very short podcast, but one of the ones that I listened to was that the host asked a question and the woman being interviewed went along for, somewhere between 11 and 14 minutes without stopping. I mean, she shifted topics and the whole thing. And I was fascinated. I stopped hearing what she was saying because I was so fascinated about the length of time she could talk without it being a dialogue, without giving him a chance to interject or ask another question. And I'm sure she had no idea. And I think when we are much more aware of how long we are talking and we can be much more succinct, that it makes for a much more collaborative situation with the people that we are interacting with. The next, and if you're familiar at all with improv, you may have heard this, but think about the difference between when you come up with an idea, you say, I think that we should have, I think that the meetings ought to be 90 minutes long, 4 days a week. And if you say, yes, but what you're saying is not yes. When you put that but in there, you're negating whatever you've said before the but. So instead of saying yes, but, you say yes, and you pick out the teeniest, tiniest part of what they said. If you feel like you disagree 100% with what they've suggested, you pick out the teeniest, tiniest part of what they have suggested about the part that you like. For instance, if someone suggests having 90-minute meetings 4 days a week, you can say, yes, and I can see the need for us collaborating regularly. That would be really good so that we all stay on the same page. How about what you've done by saying yes and instead of yes but is that you've kept the lines of communication open. The but says you're wrong and I'm going to tell you what's right. The and says I'm here with you. I heard what you said and let's add to that idea. Let's expand on that good idea that you had. So even if it's the dumbest idea you ever heard in your life, the yes but isn't going to get you anywhere compared to the yes and. And that can be in so many situations when you can replace but with and, it will alter the trajectory of your conversations. And then finally, at least in this list, is what is my go-to assumption? And the best example I can come up in general with this is, do you generally think people are going to take advantage of you? Do you generally think people are lying? Or do you generally think, they're looking at what's best for me? They're probably telling the truth. This person who wants to sell me something, they're probably decent people. They're just doing their job. Or do you think they're snake oil? I mean, what is your go-to assumption in situations? And it might not be as black and white as that, but being aware of what am I assuming? And am I sure I'm 100% right about that? Because is it possible that there is something else that's going on that my initial assumption isn't on target, isn't exactly that? So it's stepping back for a second, and instead of assuming that what you think absolutely is it possible that I'm wrong? Is it possible that I have misjudged this? Is it possible that there's another answer? Is it possible that there's another motivation? And if you tend to be trusting all the time and get taken advantage of a lot, then you kind of go the other way. It's like, am I completely negating my own needs in order to be a people pleaser? So it can kind of go both ways, assuming that people are always looking out for your best interests, or people are never looking out for your best interests. So that's one of those situations. All right, another question for you for the chat box, if you feel like participating. At what age does your emotional intelligence score peak? Anything in there, Thad? Is anybody?
Yeah, we got somebody that said 50. I just wrote never. I don't think I'm gonna peak emotionally. Anybody else have any guesses at what age? I know you all have an age, so.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the interesting things about this is if you compare it to IQ, your IQ peaks at age 17, around age 17. And that doesn't mean that you've learned everything you're going to learn, even though a lot of 17-year-olds might feel that way. It's your capacity to learn. And that peaks at age 17, and it stays that way. I mean, your IQ is your IQ is your IQ. Your EQ the person who said 50, you're pretty close to right. It's 40. And Thad, you are also right, because the difference with EQ is you can increase your EQ as much as you want for as long as you want. The difference between the two is IQ is your IQ, EQ can be developed. And if you look at some situations where EQ is in action or not, and I'm not going to go into sides on this, but our most recent experience with mask wearing and how some people feel the reason for wearing it and other people the reason for not wearing it. And when the two people interact with one another, I mean, there's plenty of YouTube videos about how volatile it can be. And so one might say that EQ in action is doing the thing that will help your fellow man. And the EQ not in action is getting into a fist fight over which decision has been made. So if you want to know what your EQ is, there is a way to find out what it is. You don't just have to guess by looking at those subscales. There's the EQI 2.0, which is, again, the assessment that will, through answering a number of questions, will tell you where you land. And then you get something that looks like this, which says where you land on all these different subscales. And then people can look at them and say, well, you know what? I know that this impulse control seems low here. I don't know if it is on there, but that this one particular, and it's impacting my life and my work in ways that are detrimental to me. So I want to work on that one. When I work with clients on these, we don't always pick the lowest one. We pick the one that is having the most impact. And it's also important not to only look at the low scores, is to look at all the scores and see where one lands. But the other thing that's very important to look at in terms of your emotional intelligence is what's called a well-being score. And that is around the outside of this, there is, it's pulling in not necessarily all of these wedges, but 4 specific wedges: the self-regard, optimism, interpersonal relationships, and self-actualization. And when you think about those 4 things, the way I described them, when you pull those 4 separate scores together, it gives you an overall well-being score that tells you how well you are being. And when people are having a tough time in their life and going through a long period of difficulty, very often looking at this score and the subscales underneath it and where the challenges can dramatically improve someone's situation simply because they're actively working on the thing that is truly improving their well-being. And people can take a test. I think the shortest one I've ever done is 4 months, but a person can take an assessment at the beginning and then another one 4 months later, 6 months later, and see improvements when they have actively worked on things that will bump those scores up, because the score isn't important. It's the skill that's important. It's just manifested. It's shown in a score. When you're thinking about, here's one of the most important things when you're thinking about changes that you might want to make. You don't have to have an assessment to do this. If you're in tune enough with yourself, and for instance, you know that you can't tap into what your feeling is, that or you know that you are triggered by certain things, or you know that you don't feel like you can ever make a decision on your own. I mean, there are things that if you sit and think about it, you might be able to say, yeah, I know that's my situation. Well, how do you go about making those changes? And there's obviously specific things that you can do depending upon what the situation is. But the most important thing is that when you want to change, practice is so important. If people could change just by reading a book or by being on this webinar, they would do it. But that's not how it works. What the book does is give a path. What the webinar does is give some ideas or maybe some inspiration to do it. But what it's going to take to truly make the change is practice. And if you look at this picture here, if you're consider that you were driving your truck down this road, if you let your hands off the wheel, the wheels would stay in those 2 ruts, and they would, if you kept your foot on the gas, they would get to that end, wherever it's going to end there, Oz or whatever that is. But if you wanted to go a different direction, if you decided, I don't want to be on this path, I want to be on this other path, what you would have to do, even, to make a slight shift, is you'd have to steer yourself out of those ruts. And in order to stay out of those ruts, you'd need to hold the wheel. You'd need to keep the wheel just tipped a little bit, because once you let go of the wheel, if you've ever, driven down a rutted road, pretty soon it's going to drift right back in to the ruts that were there before. And what this is the neural pathways in your brain. You may have heard of neuroplasticity. Your brain is absolutely something that can change. It's remarkable in its ability to learn new things and adapt and to grow. And so if you want to change something, you simply have to create new neural pathways that make it easier for you to remember to do that make it more comfortable, that make it more second nature. So if you decide that you want to behave differently when you get triggered, you just have to practice doing that over and over and over again. If you decide that you want to be better at decision making, you have to practice making decisions differently, so that you're creating a new path. So think about that. And if you do beat yourself up because you can't make change easily and quickly or in 21 days, which is a bunch of bunk. There is no science to back up that it takes 21 days to create a new habit. So you can scratch that from your memory bank. People can't do it because it's not a thing. It's just an urban myth. And I could tell you where it came from, but we don't need that right now. So practice is the thing that will get you the results you want. And compassion with yourself as you are trying to make those changes is much, much better for you than beating yourself up because you haven't made the changes, because beating yourself up because you can't make the changes is actually counterproductive. So it's patience and consistency and continuing with the thought and the focus to make the changes that you might want to see in your EQ, or frankly, anything else for that matter. All right, we're getting close to the end here, and I do have a little bit of time for some Q&A. If there are any questions that anybody has that I can, if they're in the chat box.
All right, Mary, thank you. Yeah, I'll give people some time to type their questions. One of the things I guess, well, take because it's going to be it's all about me. Is that
that's okay?
It seems like the self-awareness as to your own perceptions and biases and reactions to things, it seems like that's going to be kind of a key to how you handle. And I speak from a solopreneur who doesn't have employees, but I do work with subcontractors and as well as certainly customers, clients, and vendors. But it seems to me that that's a really key focus when you're looking at those things. The graph that you showed from the EQ test really seems to be something to be a great tool that people can use to find out where they fit with all of this stuff. Because like you said, looking at yourself, you can't, you're your own worst judge, whether you're overly positive about yourself or overly negative about your capabilities. It seems like that's a great tool to be a starting point for all of this.
That self-awareness, it's so important. And again, it impacts you and the people who are around you and just the general contentment you have with your life. And one of the things I will say, barring knowing nothing else, one of the ways to be to appear to have a much higher EQ is to always be focused on the other person, is to be curious, is to be intent on what they're saying, is to, as opposed to, it's so interesting. Years ago, I was so terrified of speaking that I would be one of those people that their voice shook so bad that people in the audience were, they were embarrassed for me. They were sad for me. They felt sorry for me. And so I did some, I did some things that made me get up in front of people so that I could try to get over this thing because it was so debilitating for me. But one of the things was I was up there thinking about me all the time, instead of thinking about what the people in the audience were going to get. And so as soon as I shifted my thinking about, it's not all about me and whether they're going to like me or whether they're going to think I'm smart, but it was just like, what did they come here for? What do they want to get out of this? What will be of value to them? And as soon as one takes the focus off of themselves and puts it on the person that they're across from or in front of, things change dramatically. There was one of my favorite things that anybody's ever said about, how to be popular or liked, was it's not about how much people like you. It's about how much they like themselves when they're with you. And I just thought that was so powerful. When you behave in ways that make people feel interesting and cared about, their perception of you is very different. Now you have to be genuine. If you fake that, then you're fake. But when you truly, in a sales situation, I can't think of anything better than to truly want what's best for that prospect. That what you're not trying to do is sell something. What you're trying to do is solve their problem.
Jeffrey had a question. How can your services help us be more successful as people and more successful in business?
Oh gosh. I look at two of the things that impact us greatly in our lives, no matter what, are time and people. How do we spend our minutes and how do we interact with people around us? And that's what I focus on. I mean, that's what I focus on with these, I call it leadership skills, but it's kind of good human being skills. And so it's how can you feel good about the choices that you make about how you spend your time, which for me, some people say, oh, you're a productivity expert. And it's like, nah, I'm not. Because unfortunately, people don't think about being productive when they're watching their kid's soccer game. And I think that's as important as any work you might be doing. So it's when you make the decision about how you're going to spend your time that you feel really good about it. The subtitle of my book is Your Guide to Being Content with How You Spend Your Time. So it's whatever you've chosen to spend your time doing. Don't work and then wish you were with your family, and with your family think you should be working. Make your choice and feel good about it. So that's the time piece. It's just so ubiquitous. I mean, it's everywhere. It's everything we do takes time. And the people aspect of it is the same. I mean, I don't know. I mean, some businesses are less people oriented than others, but who doesn't have to interact with people? And so I'm not a life coach, and I don't do life coaching, but the business coaching that I do with my clients has an impact on their life, because we're not different people at work than we are at home. We're taking the same brain here and there. We just do different things. So I hope that was a clear and probably over 40-second answer to that question.
Well, Mary, I want to thank you. If you have any other questions, Mary's contact information is there on the screen. And if you have interest in what she has to say, which is very interesting stuff, I'm going to recommend her book again, Making Minutes Matter. It is available on Amazon, both in paperback and Kindle, so you can just
and Audible too.
And Audible too.
If you're a listener, as opposed to if you want to listen to me for another few hours, you can do it that way.
It's a great way to get information while you're driving places. Although we don't drive a lot now, but it's great to just sit.
That's the truth. So walking the dog.
Exactly, Mary. I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Dad. Thanks for having me.
Very interesting stuff and some very hopeful information. To all of our attendees, thanks for coming and joining us today. The next two business success groups are actually happening on the Wednesday right before the next two big holidays. So we're going to kind of postpone those as opposed to trying to reschedule and get all that. We don't want to interrupt people's Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we're going to be picking this up again in January. So keep an eye out for an email from Kelly from the Chamber. And she will keep you up to date as to what's going on. We got some very interesting speakers who have agreed to join us in the following year. So thanks again. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful presentation from a very, very smart and successful person.
Thank you,
Thanks
Dad.
again. Absolutely. Mary, thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a good Halloween, a good Thanksgiving, good holidays. And we will hopefully see you all very soon. Mary, thanks again.
Thanks, Dad. Have a great day, everybody.